Have you ever wanted to visit a creepy island? The lure of the mystery and the scent of tragedy can be an incredible buzz for some, and if you've ever been a fan of horror, then the macabre is often far more appealing than the traditional. However, the question of spirits, evil ghouls, and loss of life roaming up the islands isn't one for the faint-hearted. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be taking a look at 3 creepy islands. Dead Man's Island. Located near the Isle of Sheppey in Kent, England, lies an inconspicuous stretch of muddy swampland known to locals and journalists alike as Dead Man's Island. You cannot visit without authorised permission, and the island has been closed to the public, uninhabited for over 150 years. When you are given permission to visit the island, you're immediately greeted by a sight picked straight out of a horror movie. Nicknamed Coffin Bay, hundreds of open coffins covered with scattered remains welcome you with a macabre boldness hitherto unseen. Over countless decades and generations that have sprung forth since, the barren mudbank has, with its moss-covered rocks and hidden cracks and caves perfect for hiding in, inspired endless tales of ghoulish spirits and rabid dogs roaming the island looking to ward off potential invaders. Some have claimed that the island is solely occupied by the deceased, which isn't surprising. It's fair to say that no one has ventured anywhere near the island since, with journalists only recently making the trip over, not out of choice, but out of necessity. The world needs to know about the tragic events that happened there. In fact, the terrible truth behind the island stems back to the conclusion of the Napoleonic Wars in 1814. Several naval ships, including the HMS Ganymede, were commandeered and converted into a floating prison, with steel bars, cells to hold hundreds of convicts, and squalid conditions. Conditions so bad that they became a filthy breeding ground for fatal diseases, with outbreaks of cholera widespread and uncontrollable. Alongside multiple diseases to deal with, the inmates were also subjected to poor food and drink rations, leaving 1 in 4 people to pass away out of 400. Because the passengers were inmates and therefore seen as subhuman by the guards, they were denied a formal burial. To prevent the cholera outbreaks from getting out of hand even more, the authorities had no choice but to dispose of the bodies of those contaminated on the closest bit of land they could find. This ad hoc disposal site just so happened to be the Medway Mudflats, which would, as a result, later become known as Dead Man's Island. It is believed by many researchers, scholars, and journalists that the burials took place throughout the 1800s. Daft Charman, a historian and researcher who studied the island and wrote a book on it, claims burials were still happening there in 1845, with bodies originally buried in wooden coffins placed in unmarked graves under 6 foot of mud in isolated locations across the Medway. In 2016, the remains of over 200 of the inmates' bodies were found. Scholars believe that they were only discovered because of the tides of the Medway rising, washing the remains out to sea and redepositing body parts along the bay of the island. Though some argue that the bodies should be reburied in proper burial sites, the sea is unrelenting and it's doubtful this will happen. Most of the lost souls abandoned there, along with Dead Man's Island itself, will all succumb to the overwhelming ocean eventually. San Servolo. Just 10 minutes from Venice lies an island with a dark and troubling history, San Servolo Island. While Italy is typically known for its decadent dishes and stunning Mediterranean landscapes, one would not travel to San Servolo to take in the view. It is, however, perfect if you are a history fanatic with a liking for the macabre. The history of the island is intricately linked to the monasteries and hospitals that were built there, the first being the church dedicated to San Servolo, a martyr from Trieste. Between the 9th and 13th century, the island served as home to the Benedictine monks, joined later by a gaggle of nuns that had escaped the convent of St. Leon and Basso that had been utterly destroyed by a raging seaquake. However, by the 18th century, only a few nuns were left. As a result, during the war against Turkey in 1716, the monastery was shut down and transformed into a military hospital. From 1725, the Senate of the Republic of Venice made an executive decision. The hospital and the island itself were both used as a makeshift insane asylum after mental illness was first recognized as a disease that could be cured. To begin with, the asylum was only used for rich patients that could afford their own treatment. Unfortunately, because of their class and resulting poor diet of polenta, many of these patients succumbed to pellagra, a condition characterized by mental confusion and bewilderment. Completely exclusive and entirely in keeping with the times, San Servolo only allowed male patients to attend the asylum. There were just 5 doctors in total, directly in charge of taking care of over 700 patients, each with a range of mental illnesses still being researched. For over 250 years, the island was used as a dumping ground for all of Italy's mental health patients. That is, until the main hospital was shut down for the final time in 1978 due to a reform of the Italian legislation on psychiatric hospitals. Somewhat unsurprisingly, the metropolitan city of Venice, the closest city, now owns the island, including all estates and cultural assets associated with the asylum. In the 1980s, the Venetian government established the Institute for the Study of Social and Cultural Marginalization, a foundation set up to preserve the asylum's history, maintain important records, and restore the island to its previous grandeur and extravagance. Since 1995, the island has also been home to Venice International University, a centre for research and education formed to bring the island's economy back up and provide a tourist attraction. Even more recently, the Venetian government began hosting an international artists' residency out of the museum, which has since become a site for countless stunning exhibitions, vibrant festivals, and mind-blowing performances. Nazino Island. Tomsk, Russia, home to a yearly pilgrimage made by locals between the city and Nazino Island, as a heartfelt gesture of remembrance and sorrow for the victims of the horrific, inhumane events that occurred there during the summer of 1933. A social experiment created by Joseph Stalin and the local Soviet authorities that worked under him. Almost 90 years ago, a small group of barges that were intended to be used to transport lumber were filled with thousands of urban déclassé prisoners, approximately 6,000 in total, and taken to Nazino Island. It's widely understood that these men and women were brought there to be used as settlers, with orders to construct a special settlement to add to Stalin's Gulag, the network of labor camps spread across the Soviet Union. This plan was part of a much larger plan to resettle at least 2 million people to Siberia and Kazakhstan, proposed by Genrik Yagoda, the head of the OGPU secret police, and Matvey Berman, head of the Gulag system at the time. The plan was to bring 1 million hectares of virgin land into production and to become a self-sufficient society within just 2 years. Nonetheless, resources were severely limited by the ongoing famine occurring in the Soviet Union. The authorities in Tomsk were unfamiliar with the urban deportee prisoners and expected a great deal from them. As a result, the deportees were sent to the most isolated work sites in a bid to keep them far away. By the time that they arrived on the island on May 18, 1933, many had already died, having quickly fallen victim to starvation, disease, and the brutal elements. This is due to the lack of tools, shelter, and food provided to them by the prisoners' armed guards, who took it upon themselves to only give them a ration of 300 grams of flour per person to mix with water and make a paste. The prisoners were disembarked in such a disorganized and hapless manner that upon arrival, only 322 women and 4,556 men were counted. The bodies of 27 people were found, thought to have died during the trip, and over a third of the remaining settlers were far too weak to even stand. Not content with the disparity in rations and the overwhelming brutality between the settlers, an additional 1,200 deportees were sent to the island on May 27th, 1933. What little order there was on the island soon began to break down and devolve into chaos. A mass of fights broke out, and many deportees were hunted by the guards, which ended up in them losing their lives. None of the deportees knew much about agriculture, which made it impossible to make the island properly habitable. With only flour provided, the remaining deportees were forced to eat flour mixed with river water, which led to widespread dysentery. With nothing to eat or drink, groups within the settlers quickly formed and many lost their lives, either as a result of arguments over food and money or as a source of food. The bodies in possession of valuable items such as gold tooth fillings were looted often, and lack of proper food and the rising death count led to widespread cannibalism across the island by late May. The dire situation was finally ended by Soviet authorities in early June. The settlements were dissolved and the surviving 2,856 deportees were transferred to other, smaller settlements upstream. In the 13 weeks since the plan was first put into motion, around 2,000 people died due to starvation, exposure, disease, someone else killing them, or accidental loss of life. A further 2,000 had disappeared and were also presumed to have died. The gruesome events that took place across Nazino Island were left virtually unknown until 1988, during the Glasnost reforms, when an investigation by human rights group Memorial first made details of the affair available to the general public. However, the event did not become popularized until 14 years later, when, in 2002, reports of the Special Commission Communist Party of Western Siberia were finally published by Memorial. But what do you make of these spine-chilling islands? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below and help us by growing this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.